but I'm glad. I'm glad that we were able to get this in because I think that the topic, especially, isn't important. And this is, I mean, Bilal's been trying to get me, I think, for a couple years now here. And apologies that it took this long, but happy to be here. And inshallah, this will be not the last time. This talk is mostly geared toward the youth. If you're over 40, sorry, this is not for you. No offense, you're welcome to stay and to listen, but it's just practically speaking, Islam has always been a youth movement, that it started with the youth of Medina, taking the da'wah seriously and taking it from Al-Maghrib to China. And so this is going to be geared towards a youth audience, but of course, everybody and anybody can benefit, inshallah. I was asked to talk about politics. Yeah, I mean, that's what everyone is thinking about these days, especially as we have a lot of really important things going on. The most important, my argument will be, is going to be the US complicity and its enabling of the genocide that has unfolded, the accelerated genocide, because what was before October 7th was also a genocide as well, but it was a slow drip genocide. We have the accelerated genocide in Palestine, which the United States is perpetrating, aiding and abetting. And so as people who live in this land, it's just simple math that part of our duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to do everything that we can to stop that complicity. And it's actually very, very important. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has an amazing qadr that we see unfolding in front of us, because this particular issue has unraveled a lot of other dynamics and a lot of other things that we have to pay attention to. A couple months ago, I was in Dallas for the EMJA conference. You've heard of EMJA, it's the American Muslim Jurist Association. And I was asked to present a paper on framing Muslim political participation in the Sharia framework, since I do have a degree in each, which isn't very hard to do. Unfortunately, we live in a time where a certain apolitical discourse has been normalized for quite a long time. And there's different flavors to it. Don't think that this is a sectarian thing, that there's many different types of apolitical discourses of Sufi or Salafi variety that have dominated our imagination for what is important. If you're an Arabic speaker and you're interested in all the nitty-gritty details on the permissibility of voting or these types of things, there's a great book by Sheikh Saleh Fahad Al-Ajlan, Al-Intikhabat fil Fiqh Al-Islami, where he runs down all the opinions, all the evidence, and presents his analysis of the situation. I'm not here to talk about the permissibility of voting. What I am here to demonstrate and try to prove is one of the main points that I made at the EMJA presentation, which is that the way that American society is set up, it demands a high level of participation. That if you do not take an active role in shaping what your government does, someone else will be. And it's very likely that that someone else will be your enemies. And we've seen that. Actually, if you haven't seen the video we did for Yaqeen Institute on anti-terror law in the United States, anti-terror law in the United States is something that Israel has been helping the United States form since 1969. And they specifically did it with the PLO in mind, right? So this is something that, you know, they found a neutral language or a neutral sounding language to sell it. But in reality, the way that they formed anti-terror law, and by step from the 60s to the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, that they 100% had the Palestinian diaspora and the Palestinian resistance groups in mind, which is why the only organization to ever be designated as a foreign terrorist organization by Congress is actually the PLO. And there were certain consequences to that. Just check the video for more details. But basically, there were some negative consequences of doing that because the UN was recognizing the PLO at a time where the US kind of went the opposite direction. Sounds familiar, right? And that actually caused the US and the Israeli lobby to adjust. And actually, instead of putting that power with Congress, to move it over to one of these three-letter agencies, which has happened. Anyway, the point is that if you don't get involved, other people will hold the reins and will hold the wheel, and you won't like it. And we've seen in the discourse that has evolved or been in front of our faces since October 7th, what that might look like, where there are people that would love for the definition of material support for terrorism to include things like Allahu Akbar, and would include things like supporting any resistance in general that to the apartheid entity in Palestine. So if we don't want this to become France, if we don't want the United States to turn into France, if we don't want the United States to be just a blank check for everything that the occupation in Palestine does, we have to get involved. Now, that doesn't mean what a lot of people think it means, and I'm going to try to go into some of the details, and we're going to have time for questions and conversation in the end. So get ready, sisters. I don't know if that's going to be like writing down questions and sending up a note, or if we have a floating mic, but yeah, I just want to, one of the benefits from sorry, I have to throw the UK under the bus here. Is like, when I was in the UK, because I've been in the UK like once a year or twice a year for the past couple of years. One of the brothers told me, it's like, they're going to make you feel like a liberal. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, you'll see. So I did an event with Mohammed Jalal, Thinking Muslim, and we were in a masjid like this, but the sister side was completely walled off. And then we asked at the end, we said, do the sisters have any questions? And the brother running like the masjid, he said, we don't let the sisters ask questions. I was like, oh, I see what you meant. So all that being said, we want to hear from both sides, whatever mechanism. If we have a floating mic or writing down questions or whatever, like, we're not ignoring anybody here. We want to have your questions and your discussion after this. So, one thing that I've reflected on, we've heard Vision 2030. Everybody's got a Vision 2030, and the Heritage Foundation came out with Project 2025 and this, that, and the third. And one of my reflections is that everybody has a Project 2025 except for the Muslims. We're accused of wanting to take over everything, and we don't even have a Project 2025. It's like, guys, how could we be plotting to take over everything? We haven't even planned that far ahead. And now that it's popular now, even Tucker Carlson is challenging the official line on 9/11. I can say something that one of my sheikhs said years ago in Medina. He's like, Tom, you've been here for long enough in Saudi. Can 19 Saudis do anything at the same time? I was like, Billah, you're right. Anyway, that's aside. The thing is, we're the only group of people without a plan 2025 or Project 2025. And this is a problem. We actually have to chart the course of where we want to go as a community and where we want the country to go. And if you look back in history, what's really interesting is that the way that political change happens, especially here in the United States, it actually doesn't happen by necessarily articulating a huge platform. What's your stance on every single issue? And then trying to move forward with all these issues at once. And there was another presenter, I'll leave him anonymous, at EMJA that basically did this. And I was very annoyed because, historically speaking, that hasn't worked. What has worked in the US is focusing on individual issues and putting things in sequence, right? Things have to fall like dominoes. First something, then something else, then something else. And part of the analytic work that has to be done is figuring out which domino has to fall first, which one has to fall second, which one has to fall third. I'm going to argue that this is also the prophetic method as well, but we'll get there. So if you look at even women's suffrage, right, getting women the right to vote, if you look at prohibition, which, by the way, people talk about it as being a failure. Not really. I mean, the fact that you could get a constitutional amendment to prohibit alcohol is a demonstration of tremendous political mobilization and power. So that in alone is successful. Whether it lasted or not, that's a separate issue. Civil rights, all of these things were not necessarily establishing a widespread platform of here's what we say on housing, and here's what we say on healthcare, and here's what we say on gun control, and here's what we say on this, and here. It wasn't actually like that. Usually it's about taking one particular issue and just laser focusing on that, and then driving all of your energy into that, and then seeing what possibilities that creates next. If you want an example of an evil group of people who did this successfully, the Zionists. From the 1880s onwards, the Zionists were thinking only about creating a state for Zionists. And they played around. They didn't even know where they were going to do it at first. Some of them thought Uganda. Some of them thought South America, in Argentina. Eventually, they landed on Palestine, to all of our loss. But the thing is that they fixated on one particular goal. They put all of their intellectual, financial, etc. resources behind it, and they kept on driving to that goal until they were able to accomplish it. So this is the way that political change works. It doesn't work necessarily by just, again, building out this broad platform and then building this huge coalition and marching forward together with everybody. It also doesn't happen by signing yourself up to basically marry one of the existing political parties that exists. And that's, I think, one of the things that we need to hear in our time and place. that if your hopes for advancing the interests of the Muslim community relies exclusively on one of the parties winning all the time, I can guarantee you that statistically that does not happen. They take turns. Like one of them wins and then the other one wins, either at the state, federal, or local level. Now, yes, of course, Massachusetts might be a blue state, and other states might be more one to the other. But even then, you've got primary elections, and we'll talk about those. You've got to shape the way that things are going, rather than look to try to find who's your hero, who's your savior going to be, and expect them to deliver you. Okay, so we have to be super clear about how political change happens and how it doesn't happen. And some of the ideas that we're coming back to here, the idea of sequence, that things happen in order, that they don't all happen at once, that there has to be a strategy to get you from point A to point Z, and that our theory of change is not just dependent on individual saviors coming along. We need our Mamdani, or we need our Obama, or we need our whatever, that you actually can't skip over the base. You actually can't skip over the political base of the people who are in this room right now, right? You are the people that make history, not just the individuals. Even the Salahuddins of the world are the products of a base of people underneath of them that put them in the position and enable them to do the work that they eventually did. Okay, this is in history and historiography. This is called great man theory of history, and it's no one believes it anymore. That it's not just individual people that rise out of the ashes and change everything. That it's actually systems, unless you have a prophet. That's, I think, the exception. But in general, we're talking here. So I am adamant that this is the way that the Prophet ﷺ went about changing history. That there were different periods, there were different things that had to happen first and things that could only happen later within the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. Some of the scholars, such as Dr. Israr Ahmed, have written books about this periodization. He has a book where he talks about the first era being the period of, I think he calls it passive resistance, the early Meccan period, where you go to pray in the Kaaba and you're going to get beat up and you're going to get tortured, and Bilal is tortured, and Sumayya and Yasser are martyred, and these types of situations. But that period doesn't last forever. That period has a certain situation and a certain upside to it. It's very important that the Prophet ﷺ was not allowed to take up arms at that stage, not just for the mathematical reality that he probably would have been put down and wiped out, but also for the dawah aspect of it, if you will, that enough people, a critical mass of people, hadn't been alerted to what Islam actually was. And the Muslims hadn't actually achieved the sympathy of a critical mass of people yet. Right? And so this is what Dr. Israr Ahmed talks about when he talks about the wisdom behind social and political change happening according to passive resistance and then active resistance and then what we'll call active resistance plus. That in those initial stages, when you are an oppressed minority, if you're able to stick to your principles and if you're able to stick to your values and to virtue, that people have fitrah. We believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created people with fitrah, that you will actually win the sympathy of a critical mass of people. Take the example of the boycott that the Quraysh tried to impose upon the Muslims. Who was it that ended the boycott, or who was instrumental in ending the boycott? It was actually a group of kuffar, a group of idolatrous non-Muslims that felt bad. They actually said, why are we doing this to these people who are our brothers, our clansmen, our tribesmen? We don't understand. This seems like it's too much. Sounds very familiar, right? So that having that there, it's not everything, but it's very important, like to not skip over that stage. And if you look at some of the leftist movements that go straight to like taking up arms or whatever, like taking the 60s, the SDS and the Weathermen Underground and things like that, they like jump the gun going to something that's like all the way at the end of the extreme of trying to achieve political change, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work because people don't have sympathy for you. They don't trust you. You don't have credibility with them. And part of the dawah dimension is building credibility and trust of the people. So we see that there was a period of passive resistance, but then there was a period of active resistance. And the difference between passive resistance and active resistance is that in the active resistance stage, you start to go dictate the times and places in which you're going to court persecution and oppression. Think when the Abdullah ibn Mas'ud went to the Kaaba to recite the Quran, and Abu Bakr similarly, and was beaten up for it. And the Prophet ﷺ, they're challenging, they're daring the Quraysh, now that they've got the attention of the Quraysh and the people of Mecca, and they've gotten some sympathy, now they're provoking them. They know their enemy, they know their adversary, they know how they're going to react. Now they're baiting them into continuing to react that way because it's going to continue to develop sympathy from a critical mass of people for the Muslims. And we see this even affect the likes of Umar ibn al-Khattab, right? Someone who had sympathy, part of one of the narrations of how he eventually accepted Islam, when he sees the Muslims start to leave for Habasha, for Abyssinia. And he kind of gets emotional because he's realizing that his staunch opposition to the Islamic movement was something that actually is having real tangible effects on lives. And so this is the era where you are now, if we want to draw a modern example, we could say the civil rights movement, the bus boycott, Montgomery bus boycott. These are things that, one of the ways in which we've been cheated in our historical memory is to think that Rosa Parks was just some random lady on the bus that day that was just tired and didn't get up. No, she was handpicked for that moment. Like, there was a lot of organizing that went into that moment, and lots of committees and organizations that said, well, who's going to be the best person, and what day, and what neighborhood, and how are we going to respond? They had that all planned out. That's what active resistance looks like, where they know what's going to happen when Rosa Parks refuses to get up from her seat, and they've planned for that moment, and they've baited their adversary and opposition. They've dared them to continue acting like they had been acting up until that time. And once they do, you've laid the trap, and then you're able to achieve your political aims. Okay, so that's one thing, that sequence matters. Not getting ahead of ourselves, understanding how things have to unfold. And I'll talk more about that and how it applies to our community and to Zionism in a bit. The second thing is understanding what is the weakness, understanding power and weakness. That we misunderstand power, I think, in the Muslim community. If I had a dime for every time an uncle said, like, in my presence, like, and one, inshallah, we'll have a Muslim president. I mean, the president is not the person who has the power. The people who are behind the scenes, behind the people in power, are the ones that have the power. Again, this is great man theory of history. It's not one individual that we just throw up in the stratosphere and expect them to change everything. It's not that cinematic. We have to have a base of grassroots building from the bottom that actually is going to have a lasting change on society. And if you look at the way that the Prophet ﷺ conducted himself throughout his mission, it demonstrates that he understood power very, very well. That when they made the hijrah from Mecca to Medina, right, geographically speaking, that places the Muslims right on one of the trade routes and the lifelines of Mecca, which was Rihlat al-Shita'i was-Sayf, right? That they have trade routes, they depend upon trade for their livelihoods, and one of those two trade routes is going north to Sham. Medina just so happens to be on the road. So what would you do naturally? You're going to try to incapacitate or draw down the capacity of your adversary and enemy. And so attacking Abu Sufyan's caravan was obvious. It was an obvious strategic decision that the Prophet ﷺ made in order to try to incapacitate his enemy, right? That's like making AIPAC have to register under FARA, or, getting money out of politics, right? If you see how your enemy derives their strength, taking away that strength from them is extremely strategic and important. And we've seen this recently with your good boy Seth Muldoon, right? Like the guy who's running for Senate, the first standing representative, and I don't know his politics, but this is only a first step, but has returned and announced his return of AIPAC money, right, in order for his bid for Senate. That doesn't happen without everything that we have done as a community since October 7th. He's reading the winds. Most of these politicians don't really stand for anything. Most of them, they just want their careers. They just want to advance. They just want the next thing. He's planning to go from a rep to go to Senate. Maybe he wants to run for president one day, whatever. He's looking at the opportunities and saying, there's a lot of heat on politicians for taking AIPAC money right now. You know what? Well, you know what's going to set me apart from the other politicians? I'm going to give that money back and I'm going to announce it. Okay? That's winning. We won. But it's not over. That's just the first win. Dominoes have to continue to happen. There's other organizations other than AIPAC, Democratic Majority for Israel, etc., all these other guys. We have to normalize this and keep on pressing on the gas and pressing on the gas and pushing forward. So economics is definitely important. Incapacitating or decapacitating your enemy, understanding what your adversary is dependent upon, right? leverage, building leverage. Leverage is all about what does your adversary need and what are they afraid of? If you can potentially deliver what they're afraid of, or you could potentially withhold something they need, that's your leverage and that's your power. And there's a lot of other examples from the Sirah, but we don't have time to get into them. I think that Bayat al-Ridwan and the whole, the Umrah that didn't happen is a classic example of building leverage that made Hudaybiyah possible. And I've given khutbahs on that, and you can check online and see the details of that. The other thing, another thing that the Prophet ﷺ understood or demonstrated his understanding of was his understanding of the need to project power. Okay? Have you ever heard the Israelis or the Israeli lobby admit defeat? Never. They never do it. Why? Because they realize that it's more important for them to be perceived as invincible than it is for them to actually be invincible. We in the Muslim community have the literal opposite problem, that we air all of our weaknesses like on social media, and we're like fighting and infighting and like, oh, this will never work. Even, billahi alaykum, even after the 2024 election, when much of us, myself included, were part of a punish vote to punish the genocide party at that point, which was Biden and Harris, right? And it was clearly Gaza that made the difference. It was clearly Palestine that made the difference in the election results. You had Muslims saying after the election, no, it didn't change anything. You had Muslim people that happen to get money, I know, from the Democratic Party, because I know these things, that are saying that no, you actually didn't have any effect. You didn't have any influence at all. Even the Democrats were blaming us. They're saying, you Muslims ruined it for us. And they're still here saying, no, actually, you guys didn't do anything, right? Why do you think that happens? Because they don't want you to realize your power. And we have a problem within the community of not realizing our power. And we have a double problem of letting our enemies know that we don't think that we have any power. There was I think it was a city council or mayor of Chicago that literally told the Muslim community in their face, he's like, no, the Muslims don't vote, so I don't have to pay attention to the Muslims. Alhamdulillah, they did what they had to do. They built out their political system and they whooped them in the election, and then they proved them wrong. That's what this looks like. You actually have to mobilize and get together to prove them wrong. And one of the lessons here is to project power. The Prophet ﷺ projected power even when he didn't have it. After the Battle of Uhud, when they lost or there was a draw, however you want to construe it, that the first thing the Prophet ﷺ did was rally the people who were left and pursue the Quraysh into the desert. They had no real power to defeat them. If the Quraysh had turned back and challenged them face to face, they would have lost, no doubt. But the Prophet ﷺ understood that projecting power was the most important thing to make his adversary think that he had the ability to do that. And that was enough to get them to retreat all the way back to Mecca, right? This is prophetic. We don't do this, we do the opposite. Okay, so we talked about history is made not just by great men, but by base building. There is no getting around building the base. And even the Prophet ﷺ, before democratic processes, was doing this. When it came to the delegations that used to visit Mecca, right? And how the Prophet ﷺ used to engage with the people who were visitors. And he took advantage of the pilgrimage season and the Hajj season, that when people were coming from around Arabia, he would give them the da'wah. He would put out feelers for who was receptive and who wasn't receptive. And as he probably anticipated that there was going to become a hijrah or an emigration, he was trying to assess which was going to be the most likely location. That's why he went to Ta'if in the first place, which ended up not working out. But then he also engaged the people of Medina when they came for pilgrimage and gave them the da'wah as well. The Prophet ﷺ also understood the need to build institutions, that this isn't just like individuals randomly doing stuff or just waiting for everybody to do the same thing at the same time spontaneously. Any coordinated action takes institutions. And the Prophet ﷺ, even in the Meccan period, before they had resources, was building institutions, such as Dar al-Arqam, right, which was the systemization of Islamic education. And then when the Prophet ﷺ first arrives to Medina, he builds the masjid. The masjid is an important institution. And we'll talk about how we need to get more out of our masjids, even just for our political aspirations. He established a marketplace because the existing marketplaces were not conducive to Muslim wealth building or wealth organization. He also did the mu'akha, right, the brotherhood between the Muhajirun and the Ansar, which was a totally radical thing. Think about it. Nobody up until that point had ever been put together in a social unit that was other than tribe and family. And he's taking people from completely different tribes and making them inherit from one another, making them share wealth, putting them together. Very, very radical idea. That was an institution. It was an institution that was meant to draw together the solidarity of the Muslims and organize them according to their faith, as opposed to other types of things. All right. So we've laid out a lot of stuff, especially from the Sirah. We talk about us as a community. There's a lot of issues that we care about. Where do we start? We do care about, when it comes to foreign policy, we care about Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sham and every different country that's got US meddling involved. Of course, when it comes to domestically, we care about police brutality, we care about racism, we care about housing, we care about healthcare, we care about a lot of things. But where do we start? My argument is that we start with Zionism for the following reasons. That, first of all, Zionism is the most evil thing that the world is currently facing. I believe that to be true. I believe that it is a unique evil. And I think that hopefully the last 2 years have proven that. Two, it's the most threatening to our existence in this country as practicing Muslims. Recently, Dropsite News released a report about the Israeli Foreign Ministry testing out, they were polling to see how their credibility has gone down across Europe and North America. And they also, in addition to that, they did message testing. So they're trying out different messages to see which ones are the most resonant to people to get them sympathetic to Israel. The most effective technique to get people sympathetic for Israel is to yell about jihad and terrorism and Islamic fundamentalism. Statistically, now we have the stats to prove it. So we know that Israel is going to lean on this all the way. You see the New York Post the other day and what they're doing to Mamdani. They're putting him up next to pictures of the Twin Towers. Even Cuomo is trying to digitally enhance his beard to make him look more mutawwir, right? They're trying to do whatever they can, right? Siraj Wahaj, just today they're trying to unindicted co-conspirator of what? That's fancy language for he didn't do nothing. Unindicted co-conspirator. They're making up terms in order to try to play to the fears of the population on this front. We have to take seriously, and this is why this is not going away until we win. Okay? That as long as Israel is an entity, as long as the occupation stands, it will be trying to turn the people of America against the Muslims here in very, very extreme ways. And it's not going away, again, until we face it face to face and actually prevail and win. This can't be a situation like after 9/11 where we run and hide for 25 years. It's only going to get worse. And actually, the moves that the Zionists have made since 9/11 have only entrenched the ways in which they demonize us and try to turn people against us. Anti-terror law, I already mentioned that. Okay, so why start with Zionism? In addition to, so this is like an existential threat. Like if we don't want to be completely criminalized or deported or turned into a total pariah, then we have to deal with Zionism. That Zionism is the most fundamental threat to our existence as Muslims, no matter where you come from, no matter what. Zionism is also, in my opinion, the most intersectional and far-reaching of the political issues that most people talk about. That we fail to prioritize and differentiate between some things that are process issues and some things that are policy issues. Some things that touch 20 different issues versus some things that are fairly isolated. Zionism affects a lot of things in this country. It affects police brutality. Okay, this is one thing, and the racialization of policing. That many police departments either share intel or techniques or trainings with the IDF. That's a fact. When it comes to ICE and immigration, right? The lists that ICE is using to apprehend and deport people, part of them come from Canary Mission and Betar, right? In New York City. These are Zionist organizations that collect dossiers on you and me. And every time I sit behind a mic and say something and I'm on memory, and they take that and they build a case against you, and then they hand that over to ICE. They hand it over to different organizations so that they'll try to do something to you. AI surveillance that we're facing here is also something that is tested out in Palestine by the occupation first before it makes its way back here. campaign finance and the fact that our elections are bought and paid for, or our politicians are bought and paid for. Of course, this is something that Zionists have a disproportionate hand in, more than perhaps any other group. So what we really want here, think about this. If we want to advance our interests on fair housing, on healthcare, on any other issue, we have to have a fair playing field first. And the existence of Zionism and the Zionist capture of the US political and legal system ensures that we are not going to have a fair playing field until we actually do something to plug up and to stop that influence. Obviously, it's also the most current. It's got a ton of momentum. Israel is under so much scrutiny right now, where the assassination of Charlie Kirk, right? And people wondering, did Israel have a role to play? A lot of people starting to dig, a lot of people on the right even starting to abandon their previous support of Zionism. Israel is under so much scrutiny that it's the moment. This is the moment to push. This is the moment, if you're to look for like a strategic window of opportunity to try to unseat Zionism or get a big win against them, that this is it. The United States, people of the United States, are more suspicious of them than ever. So my assertion here is that this can be a rallying point, and there's a lot of things that divide us as communities. There are ethnic lines, there are socio-economic lines, there are lines of Menhej, Sufi Salafi, there are Ash'ari Athari debates, there are all these things that separate the community. But I don't know of anything that could potentially unite us, not in the sense of uniformity, but in the sense of unity for political goals. I don't know of anything else like uniting for Palestine and against Zionism. As I say, Palestine's the new Aqidah test, right? It's not where is Allah, it's not the Sifat, without denigrating the centrality of those issues in the classical texts. But in reality, the new Aqidah test should be, where were you for Palestine? Where were you in 2024 and 2025 when Gaza was being genocided? So how do we proceed? I'll lay out some of the things that I've been doing and the things that I have for suggestions, and then we'll open it up to questions and discussion. Politics is one bird with two wings, and the bird won't fly if the two wings don't work together. One of those wings is electoral, and the other one is the activist wing. Unfortunately, the status quo often is that each wing accuses the other of not doing anything. If you're working on a campaign and I'm an advisor to, like, in the way background, like for the Mamdani campaign and for some others, and you see the people who are only involved in the electoral space, and they look at the activists and they're like, you guys don't canvass, you guys don't, phone bank, you guys aren't doing anything. It's like, come on now. Like, is that the only thing that there is to do? And then the activists usually do the same thing. If you're not on the street, if you're not escalating, if you're not da-da-da-da-da, you guys are only involved in, electoral politics, electeds, then you're not doing anything. This is like two wings of a bird fighting each other. Bird's going to fall out of the air. In reality, each wing has a different purpose, and different people are suited to different activities. It's fine. You might be an activist type. You might be someone who is better at the electoral stuff, or that's your interest. You don't have to throw shade at the other. Actually, there's a lot of room for coordination and for working together. There's a time when you need each, and if they work in tandem, I think we'll experience better outcomes as a community. So when it comes to the electoral front, I'll deal with that first. I think that we all realize by now that the lesser of two evils is not good enough. Okay, nobody ever again should use the argument, the lesser of two evils, to try to get you to lower your standards in what you demand out of politicians. I was in New Jersey some weeks ago in Elizabeth, and there was the governor is being elected this year for New Jersey, and the running mate of the governor is called the lieutenant governor. And this guy literally was insulting all of us in the masjid. He came in, and he's not a Muslim. Salaam alaikum. All right, that's cute. And then his whole argument was, my opponent is going to bring Trump policies to New Jersey, and I'm not Trump. That's all he had to say. He had no other game plan than that. And we started pushing him on issues. One of the brothers asked him what about the genocide in Gaza? He gave some wishy-washy answer about, oh, we support humanitarian aid. Yeah, but you're also sending weapons and bombs, right? And so the thing is that in 2025, going forward, this cannot be good enough. People have to earn your support and earn your votes. And every time you settle for less, you're only going to create a status quo that's going to become harder and harder and harder to break out of. We have trained the Democratic Party over the last 20 years to behave the way that it's behaving. They don't take us seriously. Right now, they're just starting to wonder if they should take us seriously. If Mamdani wins, they will probably think, okay, we have to start really seriously considering about taking them seriously. If we have primary wins in the primaries coming up in 2026 for the Democratic Party, like that we're primarying pro-genocide Zionist Democrats with anti-genocide, anti-Zionist Democrats, and we start to win there, then they'll take us seriously. But we can't get there if we just suffer the same, well, they're not as bad as the other guy. We demand better choices, but we have to act in a way that's going to get us better choices. And that is going to mean suffering some in the short term. That can't happen without bearing some suffering short term. And the fuqaha have talked about this as a principle that taking on suffering in the short term for a greater good or a longer term good is something that's acceptable. Nobody ever wanted Trump to be president, even the people that wanted Harris to lose. Trump is an evil person and has been horrible, and he's open to the greatest bidder, and in a lot of ways he's worse. It's arguable whether he's worse on Palestine or not, but certainly with fascism and deportations and ICE and making his own private armies and deploying National Guard, in those respects he's clearly worse. But we also have to face the fact that if we don't punish the party that's in charge when this genocide started happening, that they would learn the lesson that they could even genocide us and our community would not do anything. We would still vote for them, right? So I hope to demonstrate how this is something that's a longitudinal process. It's something that has 3 or 4 steps to it. We're probably in step 2 or 3. It takes suffering and harm. That's part of the equation. But inshallah, we hope that it's for a larger good. One of the things that we've learned over the last 20 years is that one of the incorrect or less fruitful ways of relating to politics is looking for the party that's going to save you or the individual that's going to save you. In reality, what we need to be doing is shaping both sides. Both sides are up for debate and contestation. The left has different sides to it. It's got your third-way Democrats, it's got your establishment, your Debbie Wasserman Schultzes, and your Hillary Clintons, and your, those types. And you've got your Bernie Sanders, and you've got your Zohran Mamdanis, and you've got your DSA and other stuff. Our question is not about, who's the lesser of two evils? It's what do we want the Democratic Party to look like in 3 years? What do we want the Republican Party to look like in 3 years? How do we organize? That latter question is less relevant for people in Massachusetts, but for people in Texas, it's very relevant. Do we want more Ted Cruz's or do we want more Thomas Massey's, right? This is how the thinking has to happen. And then you realize that this is more than just paying attention every fall in November when the general election happens, especially in states that are not swing states. You have to pay attention to the primaries. The primaries are almost the real election for you, as far as you're concerned. What's the party going to look like? So this needs sustained attention, all right? That this is not something that all of you are going to be able to pay attention to throughout the year. But every mosque community, my argument would be, needs a small committee of people, 5 to 10 to 15 people, that are going to pay attention to this stuff year round, okay? Think about this. The Muslim community on the national level did not have an organization, grassroots organization, paying attention to electoral politics year round for years and years and years. That is such an indictment against our priorities, our urgency, our seriousness as a community. For the record, CARE is an advocacy organization that deals with anti-discrimination law. They will tell you it's in their bylaws. They do not deal with they do not pay attention to elections year round. They do get out the vote seasonally. It's in their own. So I'm not targeting CARE. I'm saying that CARE itself is admitting to you that they are not an organization that pays attention to electoral politics throughout the year. They only tune in and fall. That means we have a huge need, a tremendous need, in order to get the right institutions and the right groups that are going to be paying attention to this stuff. Mosques, and I have some ideas about how to do that. We've done that in Pennsylvania, and I've got a lot of stuff to share for anybody who's interested or wants to do this work. Mosques are absolutely essential to this work, even if you are limited in exactly what you can do. I was shown a letter that one of the New York City synagogues was sending around to their members. It was really funny because all of the it was perfectly in line with 501c3 law. It wasn't telling people who to vote for, but you knew who they were telling you to vote for. It was saying that this election for the New York City mayor, so much is at stake. Jewish life is at stake. The longevity of Israel is at stake. This, that, and the third. But they wouldn't tell you who to vote for. And they said that you would not be permitted to attend I don't know their holidays, to attend one of their holiday dinners if you did not demonstrate proof of having registered to vote. That's how serious they are. That's how serious they are about mobilizing the vote. And 501c3s, mosques are allowed to do get out the vote activities. Mosques are allowed to become polling places, locations where you can come and cast your vote. Mosques are allowed to have candidate forums and town halls and invite politicians to come to face the community to be asked questions. We just had one on Friday in the Lehigh Valley, and I sent the questions that were to be asked because I calibrated it to the people who were showing up. Mosques are the best source of Muslim voter data. The Democratic Party, when they make their assumptions about Muslim voters, they're using the VAN, the Voter Action Network, and it's like dressed up guesswork. It's not very granular, as opposed to the data that every single mosque has in their cloud system when people register for programs. That is your voter roll right there. So these are basic things that mosques can do, and it is completely within 501c3 law. It does not take you out of anything that would be considered law. And guess what? Every other religious community is doing this. The Muslims are the only ones that aren't. So if we want different results, we have to match our peers at least when it comes to doing these things. But there's a next stage to this, and that's one of the things that I want to pitch to you, which is a 501c4. So a 501c3 is like a masjid or a church or a synagogue. A 501c4 is a political advocacy group. Okay, it's not like a PAC or a super PAC. It's a political advocacy group. You're allowed to create report cards. You're allowed to tell people how to vote. You're allowed to endorse people. But you're only giving a limited amount to actual individual campaigns. I believe that every mosque community, or at least metropolitan area, should have one of these local organizations that is guiding and suggesting the Muslim community how they should vote. We've started one up in Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. We started the month after the elections. We started in December. Again, between 5 and 10 people, volunteers, no prior political experience, no special training, meeting 1 hour a week on Zoom. And in that time, we were able to put together many events. I think we've had like 6 or 7 events in every mosque in the area, doing things like basic voter education, showing people what you can and can't do as a 501c3, laying out a strategy for the local elections and the races, figuring out where our power is, right? Like that's a really important thing that a lot of people skip over, that there are different districts, there are different municipalities. Where do the Muslims live, right? That's going to affect what you're able to affect. And don't think that the local stuff is not impactful when it comes to Zionism in Israel. Actually, it is. That a lot of the things that happen on the local level, and these are some of the questions that I fed to the community for the event the other night, Israeli bonds. Many cities and municipalities are invested in Israeli bonds. And so this is something where you can directly challenge your local officials to divest from Israeli bonds. Even at the county and the state level, you might find that there's anti-BDS legislation. I'm sure that the Zionists have tried it, at least. In Pennsylvania, we have an anti-BDS law that's not as bad as some of the others. So it's kind of like it's a discouragement. They discourage people from boycotting, but it hasn't been tested yet in a court of law. So we asked the judges that came on Friday, what would you do if this law were tested and this came to you, a court case came to you? Would you protect the First Amendment, which is our right to boycott anybody, or would you uphold the existing ban on boycotting Israel? So once you're in the driver's seat and you're starting to ask these questions, then you can record their answers, and then you can put out a report card and say, this person's running for this, and we give him an F, or we give him a C, or we give him a B, or give her an A, or give her a D, because this is how they responded to our questions, right? And these are things that I'm happy to share with anybody willing to do the work. I've got templates, I've got things that you can just copy paste and you can do yourself. But the point is that we have to take this seriously. This is the unglamorous work of what electoral work looks like. It's not just about campaigns. It's not, that's a whole other thing. But this is the infrastructure that makes those types of changes possible. And the last part is about the activist front. And the activist front is a completely different vehicle for a completely different thing. If you're going to have your minivan when you take the kids to soccer practice, you need your Jeep to off-road and to like whatever. You need different types of vehicles for different situations, okay? The activists they're built different for a different type of job and different scenarios. They are the ones who are both facing the community, and they're also the ones that tend to be willing to put themselves in high-risk situations where they're facing down evil. They're facing down police brutality. They're facing down administrations in school that are trying to get them canceled or withhold their degrees or worse. And so activists, and what activism is most useful for, is for pressure. It's for PR or bad PR. It's for mobilization. It can be for education, handing out things, right? Propaganda even, and especially for boycotts and walkouts and strikes. One of the issues that we face is that we have inherited an activist culture from the New Left. That is a problem. That the things that we do, the things that we say, the chants, even the theory of change, right? If you go to many protests, okay, it's hard. It's not Muslim friendly. Many protests are not Muslim friendly. The first thing you smell is weed. You've got rainbow flags. You've got all this sorts of gender bending queer stuff going on, right? It's not an accident that it's difficult to mobilize our community to show up to things like that. If our community can't see themselves in a movement, in an exercise, in an action, in a protest, we can't necessarily expect them to show up to something that they can't see themselves in. That's not to say that there aren't other lame excuses that people use. There are, like protests are haram, or there's free mixing going on. Like, brother, there's more free mixing in the grocery store. Don't buy groceries, right? I know. So there's other excuses, but it's also true. Both of these things are true at the same time. It's also true that the spaces do not reflect us and our values. And so we have to think about how we can create an activist culture and discourse that actually reflects our values. Not just to be able to do it effectively on our side, though that's important, and take leadership of the movement that really honestly is about us. It's not about them, okay? But also so that we can redeem the shortcomings and the dead ends that leftist activism finds itself in. That the same old tactics, it's very expressive. It's not calibrated to objectives. It's not held accountable to metrics. Like, how do you know that you're getting things actually changed? Much of the leftist activist culture is just about showing up and what you put out. Like, no, we would need to measure things a little bit better than that. Like, what's the impact that we're actually happening? And part of that comes to also matching tactics to objectives. That's another thing that I don't think we're going to have time to talk about. But also bringing back creativity and bringing back a certain culture to the protest. We've seen some gains when it comes to having Arabic and Quran recited and Salah in some of the protests. We've had a lot of gains with that, but we can do more. We can do better. We can make even protesting like family friendly or kid friendly. We can make it something that's wholesome. We don't have to make it something that's always running up against all the taboos of society all the time, right? And so we launched an organization for this too. So myself and some of the activists, such as Raja Abdul Haq, have launched an organization called Tamkeen, Tamkeen. We have a website, tamkeenmovement, I think .com or .org, where we aspire to create a new generation of Islamically calibrated and rooted activists that we have recruited heavily from the encampment movements that we went around and we paid visits to and we supported in. And we attempt to, anybody who's interested, we have like a 6-week boot camp with like 8 to 12 classes on Islamic worldview, various things, organizing, movement building, to try to build out this generation, to give them the tools. That was our reflection in 2024. We traveled the country, went to encampments, west coast to east coast, north to south, and what we found was we found a lot of good Muslim, mostly sisters, sorry brothers, mostly sisters, but also some brothers that wanted to do things in a more Islamic way or wanted to work with a more Islamic organization, but they didn't have one available to them. They were not satisfied with the SJP. They weren't satisfied with the PYM. They weren't satisfied with the MSA. And so we said, bet, let's do it. Let's put together an organization that's going to be fully Islamic and fully activist. And we're not going to perpetuate the same mistakes as some of the older movement groups where we're going to gatekeep and not let you do anything. No, we want to turn over autonomy to you as soon as possible. That once you're through the boot camp, you get to join a front of activity, whether it's the masjid front, the mosque front, or the students front, or whatever. And then you're responsible. You're responsible for getting something done. And we'll see how you do. And if that actually ends up growing into being like its own organization, we'll be happy to help you set it up. We're not going to be like some of these older groups that get territorial and act like, well, if you're not part of our group, you left the movement. No, we're not the movement. We're one group in part of a larger movement. So you can feel free to check that out. And anybody who wants more info about either of these things, you can reach out to me via email, imamtomfakini@gmail.com. Let me know like which one or both if you're interested in. I'd be happy to put you in touch or to get you up to speed on those things. And the final thing, and this is really what we're driving at. I've started to be able to see a vision of what this could lead to if we take our responsibility seriously and we avail ourselves of the amazing talent and bravery and boldness that we have, especially in the generation of youth. And that is a future within our lifetimes, within the next 10, 15 years, where we can go and travel freely without fear to Masjid al-Aqsa and pray. And we can take a van or a bus to Gaza and help rebuild it with our very own hands. I think that this, and I'm an optimist, but I believe that this vision is within sight. If you watch what happened to the Syrian regime and you saw how quickly they collapsed, falsehood is like a house of cards. They project power because they understand about projecting power. They will never let you know that they're about to fold until they collapse entirely. And I believe wholeheartedly with 100% of my being that the Zionist entity is the same. That there is a tipping point at which the whole thing is going to collapse like a house of cards and they're going to run home just the way that they started to run home during the 12-day war or whatever you want to call that. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to see that day and allow us to fulfill our wajib and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. Barakallahu feekum, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. And let's do as many questions as we could possibly do until I have to go to the airport. So I'll take that. You'll take that? Yes.
Jazakumullah khairan, Imam Tom. Wanted to share really quickly this flyer too, because a lot of the content you were talking about in the city of Malden, Massachusetts, we do have Engage Malden, formed in June 2024. It's a grassroots group driving positive change in our city by and for our city. So this year we have 3 Malden residents from our community, Abir Anab, Nicole Mosalem, and brother Muhammad Abu Taha, who are stepping up to run for local office, 2 for school committee, 1 for city councilor at large. And we have Councillor Karen Colin Hayes, who's an incumbent. She helped lead the city council's ceasefire resolution last year and is a big part of this effort. So I want to give a big shout out to Ammu Abu Taha over here for his leadership and Engage Malden in local politics. We have Allahu Akbar, Takbir, Takbir, Takbir. And we even have a lot of youth between the ages of 8 and 18 helping out. Today we had over 700 doors that they walked up to today, informing them, sharing these pamphlets. Early voting starts tomorrow and election day is November 4th. So wanted to, spread awareness and get more engagement, inshallah, like Imam Tom mentioned. So I'm going to head over to the sister sections. We'll do one question at a time for the sisters and the brothers, inshallah. So I'm going to start with the sisters, Brother Omar, and then I'll get you right next, inshallah. Anyone have any questions?
Okay. Hi. So my question is, how do you balance between or like navigate through organizing within the movement. So, for example, in this context, it's SJP, it's PYM, it's a bunch of other organizations who work together, and trying to kind of find your own voice within that movement, and still support the people, because obviously their support would still mean a lot, even if you don't really ideologically agree with them. But how can we as a community navigate through that and kind of engage with them in ways that are going to be meaningful and not completely neglect that side of the movement?
Fantastic question. This is one of the problems we wanted to solve with Temkeen, and we do work carefully and closely with SJPs and PYMs around the country as well as MSAs. And I think the larger ethos returns to how we relate to even political parties or individual politicians, that the way that we relate to our allies is about negotiating a relationship. And sometimes what happens is that we have failed to assert our sovereignty within those relationships. And when we fail to assert our sovereignty, then we kind of become a doormat, right? And then we don't get what we want, and it kind of leads to this very frustrating situation. So it's just simply about like expecting reciprocity. Like we wouldn't expect to change PYM or SJP, and we would not ask them to do so. So then just, reciprocity means that they should not ask us to change or do so. So this also gets back to the idea of like a huge front or like a big platform of several issues. We should not be pressured or cowed into like towing a party line on a particular issue such as LGBTQ or anything else, because that's not our issue. So it just becomes, there's a saying from the poet Robert Frost, right? Relevant to Massachusetts. Good fences make good neighbors, right? And that's not to be taken as like a comment on immigration, but when it comes to allies and coalition work, it's like we do have to understand the borders, right? Like what's the difference between Temkeen or PYM or SJP? That actually allows us to articulate where we interface and where we can like do the work together without having any like ambiguous or weird, awkward situation where they have like unmet expectations about us showing up for a particular thing, right? It's actually very simple to like, similar rather to like romantic relationships, like to marriage. It's like you have to have clear boundaries. Like any relationship has to have clear boundaries and things where it's like, this is what I'm doing and this is what I can sign up for, and these are the expectations that you can have and these are the expectations that we have. And that way no one feels weird about it because it's all just kind of out in the open. I think that the majority of my experience with like myself as an individual, and then also other people who have been in this space, have failed to kind of like lay out those expectations or make those boundaries. And then that leads to a lot of this confusion. Lana's best.
Assalamu alaikum, Imam Tom. What do you call it? So we have chaplains, MSA leaders, and German students from Harvard, MIT, and other schools currently in the audience. And thus far, we've spoken largely about the role masajid play in creating community action. However, Boston is a student city, and most Muslims within our universities are largely divorced from masjids and primarily affiliated with the MSA. So what is the role of the MSA? Is it just primarily activism? But many of the movements for Palestine tend to be divorced from the MSA due to political funding and other reasons. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
That's a great question. I have a few ideas on this. One is that the MSA needs to do better. That's one of the consensus points that we've come through in our analysis of the community. MSAs, I don't know why, but they're kind of dominated by a Salafi apolitical rhetoric that casts political, either voting or activism, as haram in one way or another, which is very like, early 2000s internet culture. I don't know why they haven't moved on. But I am working also with MSA National to try to develop like education modules and try to make like a little bit more of a trickle down thing where the branch MSAs get more affected by. One of the things we're doing at Temkeen is actually building out these educational models for mosques and for student groups and for MSA National, Menara West, like the big organizations, to disseminate and deploy to raise the sophistication of the political discourse that goes on in these organizations. Another thing, you mentioned chaplains. It bears saying that most chaplains are just hired mouthpieces for the administrations, and that we need to seriously think about autonomy within university settings and what that can look like. Cornell has a really interesting model where they have a foundation that they've set up. The alumni, Muslim alumni of Cornell, have set up a foundation called Diwan Foundation, where they create like what do they call it? It's like their own chaplain that they pay. The university doesn't pay them. So it's like that's how Hillel and Chabad move. It's like any way that you can allow or help the university to save on the bottom line. All they care about is money and reputation. This is why the power analysis the Prophet ﷺ did is so important. You have to understand what people care about. Universities only care about money and reputation. And so in the encampments, like this is something that, we have to also take, I'm going astray here, but you just follow me, that there's a sense that we didn't extract as much as we could have extracted from the encampments. Like we built up a lot of leverage, but then we kind of dropped the ball at the end. You have to consider what universities need and what they're afraid of. They need money. I didn't see any tuition strikes. And they're terrified of reputation. I didn't see anybody trying to analyze like USA Today top 40 lists or whatever top lists that they try to get on. What are the metrics? Who decides? How do we get them knocked down, right? Because of some of the decisions that they've made. This is what it looks like, right? This is politics, right? So, but when it comes to chaplains in particular, like you absolutely have to take control of the chaplains. It's a cost-saving measure, and that necessitates organizing the alumni. We have not organized our alumni whatsoever. Every handoff is like dropping the baton, like between MSA leadership to MSA leadership, from one president to the next, from people who are graduating, like even simple forms. And I'm trying to push the MSA National to like deploy like forms where it's like you're going to like collect non-university tied contact information so that you can follow up with people so you can organize them. Even the alumni that we have that do donate, they like do stupid stuff like donate to like a general fund. When the Zionists donate, they get together and they say, we're going to dedicate a building for Jewish student life and we're going to put some genocider's name on it or something, right? Like that's the level of strategy that we have to be at. Why were the Zionists able to haul these university presidents in front of congressional hearings and basically tar and feather them? Because they're very strategic with their alumni donations. So we have to organize the alumni. We have to have these foundations that are going to actually have like appointed chaplain positions that take that burden out of the hands of the university, so that person has more autonomy and can be a real ally for the students underneath them and not just like trying to dissuade them from doing anything risky or political.
No questions from the sister side, so more for the brothers. I had a few other people lined up, so inshallah we'll try to get to everyone. I believe Rashid was next. Omar, you? Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, I'm Tom. One of the things that always comes up as a unifying, organizing kind of principle around or enemy, you can say, is corporate power and the concentration of corporate power, as opposed to Zionism or any other thing. My fear is that Zionism is like the fad now, and people's memories are short. Our memories certainly aren't short, inshallah, with us being Muslims. That's why I agree with you in the sense of we have to stick on this. But as you can see, one of the driving pieces, whether it's universities, local political campaign finance, is the ability of rich Zionists, a lot of them Christian, not Jewish, funding and using their money to fund campaigns, whether through AIPAC or the 100 other Zionist entities. And so even the military-industrial complex being a primary beneficiary of this relationship with the weapons that are being funded. There's a lot of corporate interests at play here that aren't just purely ideologically Zionist in the sense of believing in a state for the Jewish people in the land of Palestine. So are you seeing Zionism as just kind of the primary jumping point? Do you see this as a potential area, or do you think, what's your thought on that?
I think one of the lessons from the Occupy movement was the need to have a concrete enemy, right? So I don't disagree with you. Like everything you said is correct. But when it comes to motivating people against an enemy, it really helps if you can put a face to it, right? Netanyahu is a uniquely evil individual for a uniquely evil country, based on uniquely evil premises, right? And it's the ugliness and the arrogance and the boldness. Some of the people were saying, if you want to end Zionism, just give them microphones. because the things that they say are so unhinged and they're so bold and they're so in your face. It really has a visceral, you know, reaction that it elicits from people. So this is like, you know, just I think impressionistic at this point, like how one person sees it versus the other. But I'm not too concerned with people forgetting about Zionism anytime soon, even 10, 15 years, because of everything being online and everything being recorded and the arrogance and the boldness behind them and the concrete nature of that enmity and how it's manifested. That's just how I see it. No.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Thank you, Imam Tom, for being here. I have two questions and I'm going to be quick about them, inshallah. Can you please elaborate more and provide some forms of the short-term suffering that you have mentioned? You have also mentioned that we need to punish one of the parties or both, and how. This is one. And the second, I'm glad that Dr. Nermeen has mentioned, they spoke about the engaged Malden, and that's in alignment of everything you have spoken about. And some of the issues we have facing here is that we have done, all the members of the engaged Malden have done a lot of heavy weight. However, we are really lacking volunteers. We struggle with that. And I want you to speak mostly to the people who are here, in particular, the young professionals that we don't see as much in there. And I see a lot of involvement, and I see a lot of sharing a lot of updates and WhatsApp and everything, but you don't see them there. If they really care about Palestine, I would like to see them. I would see some manifestations and applications of that. Is it fair? Is it systemic silencing? Whatever it is. But if you can link both and just like really give them a message. Some of them are all on the groups in here, and this is out of love for them. Jazakumullahu khair.
For the first question is that everything that we've suffered under the Trump administration, these are the things that we're talking about: the arbitrary dimensions, the clampdown on free speech in public society or on campus, right? These are all, you know, ICE detentions. Those of us who have that aren't citizens, that are on green cards and things like that. The advisories that CARES put out: if you're on a green card, don't leave the country, because myself, I've been stopped 6 times in a row re-entering the country. I get secondary interrogation every single time. I've had my devices confiscated by Border Patrol, right? These are all this is part of what we have to pay, in my opinion. Even now, facing down the way that Trump deploys National Guard and is trying to, I mean, we knew this about Trump, that he always tries to do what's beyond the legal until someone stops him. Even that style of politics, right? Is something that we knew we were going to have to face down. That would be a cost. So that's what I have in mind when I'm talking about the costs to pay. And when it comes to your second point, I mean, absolutely, that I think that religiously speaking, that there's no excuse to do nothing, with the caveat that there are different personalities and skill sets. There are people who are more drawn to activism versus more people drawn to electoral work. But there's absolutely no excuse to do nothing. That you have to, if you want to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment with a clear conscience, with qalbun, you know, salim, that you need to really question yourself and look in the mirror and say, what did I do? You know, what did I do when babies were being burned? What did I do when, you know, Gaza didn't have any food? And may Allah protect you from being one of these people that puts up food pictures on Instagram or something like this, because I really fear for your afterlife. Honestly, I do. That, you know, you have to pull yourself out of the matrix. You have to pull yourself out of this consumerist society that's just, you know, the neoliberal society wants you to fall asleep. That's why, you know, that's actually one of the hopeful things about being in this country, is that most people don't care. Most people are just doing Netflix and chill. Most people are not paying attention. You can show up, you can have an impact, right? It actually doesn't take that much. People say, oh, we're just 1%. First of all, they undercount us all the time. Second of all, even if we're 0.1%, Muslim history has shown that that's all it takes. We have what we need. We have enough numbers to make a huge impact. But it's about your own participation. It's about your own activation. You do not have an excuse to do nothing, right? So fear Allah.
By the way, we're going to pray at 7:40, inshallah. I'm going to try to get everyone's questions in, so jazakallah khairan.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. Jazakallah khair, mashallah. we probably only need about 5,000 of you to go around the country really and spread the word. And also we don't have anybody here over 20, 25, so we're all young. So to your first point.
You're one of them, right on.
Yes, that's right. Brother, I wanted to first, one of the flaws of Western democracies in general and America's in particular is the two-party system. And I think we know that, to your point, that Zionists support both of them, actually. And this is really a big part of the problem, the two-party system. We also, by the way, in Engaged Modern here, we have started a 501c 4C that we're trying to. But the problem, Brother Tom, is that here we have a lot of immigrants here, and we come with a lot of baggage with us, you know, and it's not easy to get people involved in politics. And there is a commission, a special commission on anti-Semitism that was just last year. It was established here in Massachusetts. And we're trying to pressure them, and a lot of people are trying to talk. And I'm one of them, and I met with my representatives and trying to collect signatures. And today I met a person at a park, and I was telling him about it, and he said, no, I don't want to put my address in there. So this kind of, you know, baggage that we immigrants, so we need people like you to try and push this. But the other point I wanted to make is about Zionism. Yes, it is a big problem, and it is one of the major problems. And I want to point to the Christian Zionism. That is actually the majority of the support that they get from Christian Zionism, and it's a big movement. Well, how did that start, and how can we confront that?
Thank you so much, Ammo. So the first point, we deal with similar dynamics in Allentown, Pennsylvania. We have a lot of folks that are recently immigrated, and it's very difficult because the political culture back home is totally al-aks tamam. And I mean, like, you know, you're going to get picked up by the shorta or whatever, you do anything. So a lot of it does take some education and some outreach on that side to show people. And that's why I wrote my paper for MJ and presented it, that like, this is how this system works, that you have to participate. If you don't participate, like back home, keep your head down and you're safe. Here, keep your head down, you're in danger. It's the exact opposite. So we need to do better with educating for that. And then the only other thing I would say is adjusting what we expect or what we ask from the population that's not citizens. Yeah, it can be uncomfortable, to put your address or to put your, I can understand fear. No, the people who aren't citizens. Like I can, oh, even citizens. Okay, well, subhanallah. Yeah, that's a big problem. Yeah, if you're a citizen, you have no excuse. So you need to be educated, and there's safety in numbers. Yeah, there's safety in numbers. So I agree. This is a problem of education. The second point actually is a great point, and we don't have time to give the whole talk about how this discourse of Christian Zionism came about. Dr. Ali of Zaytuna is actually one of the best that has done this online. If you can check out his YouTube series, he's actually at Maqasid retreat, family retreat this last August. He did it specifically this. He did 5 days just about Christian Zionism. Amazing. I was taking notes. Absolutely fantastic series that he did. Yeah, you'll find it on the Maqasid YouTube channel. But it certainly is a huge problem, and it's one that we find that even folks on the right are starting to become more and more suspicious of, which is why you never turn your back completely to one party or the other. Just like Amo said, like the Zionists, they play both sides. If you play both sides, you win, right? Is that we can't say, oh, well, these people are Christian nationalists or white nationalists or white supremacists. Yeah, some of them are. But the cost of not engaging with any of them is greater, because look at how they've been able to trick them into thinking that the Israel mentioned in the Bible is the Jewish supremacist nation state. Thankfully, now we've got Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson that are starting to peel away, and other people that are starting to peel away. We need Muslims that are articulate, that are able to go on these platforms, that are able to like actually be interviewed and make that connection. It's not going to be for everybody, but we're going to need people. That's like fard kifaya. We need some amount of people are going to have to do that work in order to push forward the larger goal.
Inshallah, we're going to try to squeeze these 3 questions in. Please keep it short.
Let's just
Jazakallah. Yeah.
take all 3 questions and then
Yes.
I'll answer
Awesome.
rapid fire, and then I
Please.
should probably go to the airport.
Okay, so many questions. Oh, okay. Masjids are scared of doing anything related to election or activism. And I was looking for like a cheat sheet, because honestly, you have board members, they're not political science majors. You know, there are brothers that are well-meaning, the caretakers. So a cheat sheet of what a 501c can do and cannot do. Other quick question is young versus old. You know, it's the people that came from behind. There's us versus them sometimes, and how can we need everybody to work together. That's all right.
Rapid fire.
Assalamu alaikum, Tom. I feel like on college campuses, like I'm a college student, there's this element of fear amongst college students, especially in the past year, that stops them from engaging as much as they can or as much as they should be. I'm wondering if you have any experience or advice to break down this idea that, like, if I speak about Palestine, I'm not going to be able to get a good job, or I'm not going to get into a med school, or I can't go to law school. Like, I think that's very common, and just advice on how to break that down so that we can get more engagement.
Jazakallah khairan. Rapid fire.
It's a very basic question. When we talk about, like many people have talked about Christian Zionism, right? The thing is that one of the things that Zionists do is say that how inhuman Islam as a religion is, right? And you mentioned about like distancing from LGBTQ and all of this, right? The thing is that if you vocally say that, oh, we don't want to talk about this is against us, then they use this as a tool to say that, oh, Islam doesn't care for humanity, they doesn't treat everyone equal and so on, right? So how do you like tread that line, very fine line?
Right, and last question.
How could I help Palestine?
Yeah,
Mashallah.
salam,
Jazakallah
mashallah,
khairan.
mashallah. May Allah make you the liberator of Palestine. Okay, so yes, youth and old need to work together. You've got experience, you've got resources, you've got networking. That's the things that the youth generally lack. Support every single person that's been fired from a job for speaking out for Palestine. If you're a business owner, you have to hire those people. Okay, you need a support network for the people who are willing to put themselves at risk. And similarly, if people are they're at an encampment, they're running an encampment, or they're at the university and they're getting like the heat from their administration, there is safety in numbers, right? You have to come to support. I think that's one of the ways that the older generation can really help the youth. When it comes to Masajid and being a 501c3 and what can you do as a 501c3 versus a 501c4, this is very easy. Google search it. It's there. They have charts and graphs and stuff like that. I'll explain all the differences. When it comes to fear, Allah is Ar-Razaq. No Zionist can take a penny out of your pocket. No Zionist can shorten your life by a second. We teach these things in the masjid, but we don't believe them. We act like kuffar, to be honest with you. We act like kuffar. No Zionist can take a single penny out of your pocket. The Prophet ﷺ said, your rizq is written the time you are in the womb of your mother, and no one can do anything about it. The Prophet ﷺ said to Ibn Abbas, he said, if the whole world were to gather together to hurt you, they cannot hurt you except by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala qad kutib has already written. So act like it. That's what you've been taught from a young age. Now it's time to walk the walk and demonstrate it. And I can tell you some personal stories. Before I was a Muslim, I was supporting Palestine, alhamdulillah. I was against the invasion of Iraq. I got suspended from school. I got threatened I would get held back. I got threatened with this and threatened from that. Nothing bad ever happened. Allah is Ar-Razaq. Allah gave me Yaqeen Institute. Allah gave me study in Medina. Allah gave me everything, right? Allah's in control. It's just, you have to walk the walk. If you believe Allah's in control, put yourself in the position of Ismail. You will find that Allah's in control. You can't change Allah's qadr. Nobody can, especially not some slimy Zionist. They're disingenuous. So you have to be able to distinguish between what are like genuine criticisms versus disingenuous criticisms. I don't believe that many people are convinced by those things, right? First thing, because many conservatives are also very upset at the LGBTQ zeitgeist on media. If you go to any YouTube video about Disney or about these major, there are tons of comments that are critical, say like, oh, another character that's gay, right? It's like they're sick of it. American people are sick of having it forced down our throats. On the other hand, though, we do, I think, have to distinguish what we on our values are compared to some of the conservative Christian and their values, because we're not the same. It's like, and this is not our fault. This is actually the fault of the LGBTQ lobby and discourse, which tried to make a conflation between bodily safety, like not getting harmed by vigilante violence, equal to recognize my marriage and my pronouns. No, those two things are very different. We don't have a tradition in Islam of vigilante violence. We want everybody to be safe as a person. That doesn't mean that we recognize your pronouns or your right to be violent. So those distinctions, I think there's an important place for. But at the same time, there are some disingenuous characters that you don't let them bully you because they're never going to be happy with you. And we see this with the New York Post and some of these people. No matter what you say, they're just looking for a clip. They're looking to twist your words. They're looking to do anything. Thank you very much, everybody. I have to go to the airport. Barakallahu feekum.